Hello and welcome to Nutrient Nirvana. I'm joined once again by Mr. Ralph Ellis, author of 10 books on ancient and biblical history. In this episode, we're going to focus on Artisan's Golden City, near Luxor, discovered in September of 2020 by the former Minister for Antiquities in Egypt, Zahi Hawass. Or, at least, that's what the legacy media have told us. Ralph, I believe you have a very different interpretation of this story.
Hello again. Yes, everyone. And yes, I have a very different take on this story. I was going to start by sort of quoting from the legacy media. This is from The Guardian in the UK. And the title is 3,000-Year-Old Lost Golden City of Ancient Egypt Discovered. And it says archaeologists, well, in a way it's talking about Zahi Hawass here because Hawass made this announcement, so it's largely down to him. And it says archaeologists have hailed the discovery of what is believed to be the largest ancient city found in Egypt. Well, that's we'll look at that in a minute. Buried under the sand for millennia, which experts said was one of the most important finds since the unearthing of Tutankhamun's tomb. The famed Egyptologist Zahi Hawass announced the discovery of the lost Golden City, saying the site was uncovered near Luxor, home of the Valley of the Kings. Zahi Hawass said the city was lost under the sands. Yeah, okay, and it goes on and on. I think we've heard enough of that. That is 100% bullshit. sorry to say, Guardian reader and Hawass fan. This city was not lost. It was not buried by sand. It was not golden. And it's not even a city. Apart from that, Zahi Hawass got it, completely correct. Okay, so what is he talking about? He's talking about a village for the artisans who were working on the temple of the royal scribe and Amenhotep, son of Hapu. So this was a village for the workers, a temporary village for the workers. It wasn't a city. And it was not golden in any shape or form whatsoever. And it was not lost, of course, because we've known it's there for ages. So Amenhotep of Hapu, he was the chief scribe and architect of Amenhotep III, who you might recognize as being the father of Akhenaten. So he is quite important, and this whole episode and this architect, Amenhotep, the son of Hapu, is all quite important in the history of the region, but also the biblical history of the region, as we'll see in a minute. So this Amenhotep, he built the mortuary temple for Amenhotep III, because he was an architect as well. And he built the two colossi of Memnon, the two large seated statues of pharaohs you might have seen down in Luxor. The thing is, this village, it wasn't a city, this village was not lost. It was excavated by Robichon and Varil in 1936. And we have their archaeological report. It's called the Temple of the Royal Scribe of Amenhotep, son of Hapu. And it fully details this village. Well, it details the whole of the temple. And as you'll probably see if we put in some of these images into this talk, the temple is quite large and the village is very, very small in comparison. It's only a very small village for the workers. And So what's going on here? Well, it's the usual disinformation we get from the modern media and from modern archaeologists. So Hawass is selling here a story to the highest bidder. And again, like we saw with the mosaic at Hukok, the elephant mosaic that we discussed earlier, this was sold to National Geographic. And of course, National Geographic doesn't want a headline for National Geographic saying, previously excavated worker village is examined. I mean, that just doesn't sell any magazines, does it? So they recast it as the Golden City discovered from under the sands. Yeah, disinformation. Lies. That's what it is. So, as I said, the village was first excavated in 1936, and one of the primary things that they discovered with this village was a strange wavy wall. Now, in the report that was given by Hawass, it was mentioned that this was, because it does look a bit strange. It's sort of a curved waving wall, and it was suggested that this was a defensive wall. But it's not. I mean, it's only one brick thick. It wouldn't be much of a defense, so I don't see why anyone would call it a defensive wall. What it is what's known today as a crinkle crankle wall, which might sound a bit daft, but there we go. A crinkle is a wavy wall. A crinkle is something that's crinkled. It's made into a wave type pattern if you crinkle something up. And a crankle comes from the word crank, as in crankshaft, which is also like a W-shaped pattern. It's crinkled. So they call this a crinkle crankle wall, and it's not a defensive position. It's a very interesting way of building a wall because it has lateral stability. So whoever built this wall was actually rather clever, because you need less bricks to make a crinkle crankle wall than if you are building a straight wall, because a straight wall has lateral instability, so you need foundations for it. You often need a double brick width, and you need buttresses with it to keep it standing upright. Whereas a crinkle crankle wall, you don't need any of that. You can build it on the surface, and it is naturally stable. And you can build it one brick thick. And during the Victorian era, we had quite a few of these walls built in Britain. I think there's a few in America as well. There's some examples over in America. And the only difference is it needs slightly more land area to make it. And I was just wondering myself if this Victorian habit of building a crinkle crankle wall, whether that came from Egypt, because of course this was the era when Egypt was being opened up. And perhaps someone saw that because, this wall was excavated previously in 1936 and maybe before that. Maybe someone brought the idea back to Europe and back to America and started building these walls in Europe. So it might be an Egyptian idea that's been transported. Anyway, they were wrong on that as well. It's not a defensive wall. It's a very, very clever wall that is very cheap to make and is very stable. Hawass is not off to a good start. But the interesting thing about this excavation of this temple is the character involved. Amenhotep, or Amenhotep, same name, the son of Hapu, because he's mentioned by Manetho, the 3rd century BC historian from Egypt. And he gives a lot of information about the Amarna era. And he says of Amenhotep III, he says, this is a quote from Egyptica, which is his history of Egypt, which comes to us because we don't have any copies of this left. So it comes to us by quotes from Josephus, Eusebius, and Africanus. Anyway, Manetho says, Pharaoh Amenhotep III desired to see the gods, and he communicated this desire to his namesake, Amenhotep the son of Papis, who is this same architect, Amenhotep the son of Hapu, or Happy, who in virtue of his wisdom and knowledge of the future was reputed to understand the divine. Son of Hapu, because he's called also the son of Papis, I rather think that they're calling him the son of Happy. And Happy was the god of the Nile in Egypt, and he had large pendulous breasts because he was the minor god of fertility. And I think that's because most of these people were the son of one god or another. And so I think he's called Amenhotep, the son of Happy, the Nile god. So anyway, his patron, who is the king, the pharaoh, Amenhotep III, is asking of him, divining the future. So Amenhotep, the son of Hapu, replied that the pharaoh would be able to see the gods if he cleansed the land of the lepers and other polluted persons. The king was delighted and assembled all of those in Egypt whose bodies were wasted by disease, numbering 80,000 persons. Now, these are the 80,000 lepers and maimed priests that we've talked about before, who were corralled together and thrown over onto the east bank of the Nile. This is a story about the founding of Amarna, the new city of Akhenaten. Remember, Akhenaten was the son of Amenhotep III. This is the exact era when Amarna was set up. And it was set up because this scribe and architect, this advisor, this prophet as well, was saying that Amenhotep III would well, he says, be able to see the gods. Things would be better if he cleansed his lands of the lepers and maimed priests. And these were obviously the priests who venerated the Aten, the god of Akhenaten himself. So get rid of all of these priests who were trying to change the religion of Egypt into the Aten, and banish them to the east bank of the Nile, which is exactly what they did. So the quote goes on. It says, these 80,000 maimed priests and lepers he cast into the stone quarries on the east bank of the Nile, there to work segregated from the rest of the Egyptians. Among them there were some learned priests who had been attacked by leprosy. This is the foundation of Amarna, the city of Akhenaten. And the learned priests attacked by leprosy, Josephus Flavius, who quotes this, of course, in his books, gets all upset about this and says that there's no way you could have priests who were affected by leprosy because they had to be in good health and whole. It was one of the considerations for being a priest. You could not have any defects. There was a priest in a later era in the 2nd century BC that they wanted to take away from the priesthood, so they cut his ears off to make him not whole, and therefore he couldn't be a priest anymore. So, Josephus is saying you couldn't have priests who are lepers, but he's sort of missing the point here. These are not physical lepers. These are theological lepers. They are the priests of the Aten, who considered all of the other gods to be heretical and were trying to change the religion of Egypt. And that's why they got banished onto the east bank of the Nile, which is where Amarna is. It's right in the center of Egypt on the east bank of the Nile. Anyway, the text continues. It says, then this wise seer, Amenophis, son of Hapu, added a prediction that certain allies would join the polluted people and would take possession of Egypt for 13 years, which is pretty much exactly what happened. That's how we understand the system. Akhenaten was in power for about 13 years. Some of that was in a co-regency with his father, but his little commune on the east bank of the Nile lasted for about 13 years. So this is what we're talking about here. And then it goes on to say, after a number of years, so it says, when the men in the stone quarries had suffered hardships for a considerable time, they begged their king, who I say was Akhenaten, to assign them a dwelling place and a refuge in the deserted city of the shepherd kings at Avaris, which is Pi-Ramesses, the city of the Exodus. And then the king, again Akhenaten, consented. According to religious tradition, this city was from the earliest times dedicated to Typhon, who is Seth, and that's true. Up in Pi-Ramesses, Avaris, they did venerate Seth quite a lot. So again, all of this is true. It says when the men in the stone quarries had suffered hardships for a considerable time. When they did some archaeology on Amarna, they found mass burial pits of workers who were deformed by the amount of work they had been doing. So they really were doing hard labor. And the hard labor was building this city for Akhenaten. He wanted his city built as soon as possible. And so they had to hew out all of the bricks from the quarries, which is why it was known as the stone quarry on the east bank of the Nile. And they had to make mud bricks for Pharaoh, for Akhenaten, whether they had straw or no straw. As it says in Exodus, you are idle, you are idle. You will make mud bricks whether you have straw or no straw. The only thing the Bible doesn't tell you is what the name of that particular Pharaoh was. And it's always assumed that this was the evil Pharaoh of Egypt who was oppressing the Israelites. But it wasn't. It was their own Pharaoh who was oppressing his own people because he wanted his new city to be built as quickly as possible. And so this was Akhenaten goading on his followers to make the city of Amarna as quickly as possible. You are idle, you are idle, make more mud bricks. And that's exactly what Manetho is saying here. And perhaps I should point out at this point that this is the little Exodus. So we had the big Exodus, which we talked about before, about the Hyksos being kicked out of Egypt. Now, the Hyksos had effectively returned with the Joseph story of returning down into Egypt. And Joseph, I think, quite possibly is Yuya, and Yuya was the patriarch of the Amarna dynasty. And now we're having this small exodus, the small exodus of the 80,000 lepers and maimed priests, the 80,000 followers of Akhenaten, who had been exiled to the east bank of the Nile at Amarna. And as we said before, did we say this before? I think we did. This story of the founding and the dissolution of Amarna is exactly the same as the Rajneesh community in Oregon. So if you want to know what happened at Amarna with Akhenaten and Nefertiti and all of that business, just have a look at the Netflix film called Wild Wild Country, because history repeated itself. This little story of the Rajneesh community setting themselves up in Oregon and building their new city from nothing, and then the whole thing collapsing and then going into exile, is more or less exactly the same as the Amarna experiment, almost exactly the same. So if you watch that film and just replace the spiritual leader, who I think was called Rajneesh, if you replace him with Akhenaten, you can see exactly what happened during this early era. And just in case you don't know, the Amarna era is circa around 1330 BC. So quite early. We're in the Bronze Age here, before the United Monarchy, before the Sea People invasion. So quite an early era, before the Ramesside period in Egypt. Anyway, Manetho goes on. So these people had gone on their exodus. They'd gone out of this, out of Amarna on the east bank of the Nile, and they'd gone up to Avaris, which is by Ramesses. And Manetho goes on, and he says they occupied this city and used it as a base for revolt. And they appointed as their leader one of the priests of Heliopolis, who was called Moses, and we will go into this in a minute. And but Manetho calls him Osaseph, and they took an oath of obedience to him in everything. So the leader of this new group, this exiled group of the Amarna people, the followers of Akhenaten, the new leader was called Osaseph, which means the son of Osiris. And later on in this story, and we'll come across, but we might as well mention it now, Manetho links this up with the biblical story. So he says that Joseph, him of the coat of many colors, was called Petaseph, which means the son of Ptah, Ptah being the god of stonemasons. And Moses, the biblical Moses, was called Osaseph, which means the son of Osiris. And so the leader, what he's saying now, that the leader of these people, the followers of Akhenaten, was called Moses. And he firmly links this into the biblical Moses, as we will see in a minute. So in a way, you could say, well, even here and now, you could say that the two famous brothers who led this group of people, in history, they are called Akhenaten and Tuthmoses. The brother of Akhenaten was called Tuthmoses. And in the biblical story, he's called Aaron and Moses. Same two brothers. Anyway, we'll come across that. So let's carry on with the story. So Manetho says, first of all, Osaseph, that's Moses, made it a law that they should neither worship the gods nor refrain from eating any of the animals sacrificed to the Egyptians, but should sacrifice and consume all alike. And they should have intercourse, social intercourse, with none of those except their own confederacy. And that's true, of course, of the Israelites in Egypt. They did refrain from eating they did not refrain, I should say, from eating the apis bull, which was sacred in Egypt at the time. Remember that on the Exodus, Moses killed 3,000 apis bull worshippers on the Exodus. Quite obviously, he was happy to eat bulls or sacrifice bulls at that time. What he probably wouldn't have done is sacrifice sheep so much. No, that's not actually true, but the processional era had changed from Taurus to Aries, and so now this was part of the religious divide between the Egyptians and the Israelites, the Hyksos Egyptians, is that the Hyksos were now venerating sheep, not bulls, which is why they were known as shepherd kings, which is why the patriarchs in the Bible were called shepherds, because they were the Hyksos shepherd kings, and they were venerating sheep because that was the processional great month of Aries at that time. And yes, they should only have social and probably sexual as well intercourse with none save their own confederacy, as Jews do today. They do not marry out of Judaism. They are very strict on that, which is why they've remained as a cohesive unit for 3,000 years or more. And that's exactly what Manetho is saying here. And remember, this is not a biblical story here. This is history as Manetho understood it. And he was an Egyptian historian, 3rd century BC. He obviously knew a bit more about this than we do today. But he's paralleling the biblical story. Anyway, he continues and he says, after framing a great number of laws like these, completely opposed to Egyptian custom, he ordered them with their multitude of hands to repair the city walls of Avaris and make ready for war against King Amenhotep III. And so they're in Avaris, which is Pi-Ramesses, and they're rebuilding the defensive walls around this city because they think that Amenhotep III will attack them. Now, this is slightly different to established history as we know it, but remember the history of this era is not entirely certain. We know that Akhenaten had a co-regency with his father, Amenhotep III, this very pharaoh we're talking about. It's thought that the co-regency was only for about, 6 years or so. Some people like Ahmed Osman gives a number of reasons why he thinks there was a longer co-regency. But here Manetho is indicating that Amenhotep III was still alive at this time, even after Akhenaten and Nefertiti had been kicked out of Amarna and they'd gone to Avaris, which is in the Nile Delta, it's up in the north. They're indicating that Amenhotep III is still alive, probably down in Thebes, and is organizing an army to attack these 80,000 lepers and maimed priests, the people of Akhenaten. So it's slightly different to history as we know it. In standard history, Amenhotep III would have been dead by now. And it continues. It says, then Ososeph is Moses, the biblical Moses, sent an embassy to the shepherds who had been expelled by Thutmose in the city of Jerusalem and begged them to unite wholeheartedly in an attack upon Egypt. And people like Josephus Flavius cannot believe this. They cannot believe there is any link between the people in Egypt, these 80,000 lepers and maimed priests, and the shepherds who had been expelled by Thutmose. Well, that actually does accord very well with history as we know it, because we've already seen the great exodus out of Egypt, which happened, well, just before the time of Thutmose I, was the exile of the Hyksos people. And of course, the shepherd kings, that's why they're called shepherds here. And of course, I've linked the shepherd kings, the Hyksos, with the Israelites because their two exoduses, the great exoduses, were exactly the same. And where did they go to on that great exodus? Well, a lot of them went to Jerusalem. So yes, of course, there would have been a lot of Hyksos people in Jerusalem at this time. And if the Amarna dynasty was descended from these Hyksos exiles, as the story of Joseph seems to indicate, where they'd come back down into Egypt under the leadership of Yuya, who is the biblical Joseph, then yes, they would have been related to these ex-Hyksos Israelites who are now in Jerusalem. And that's exactly what it's saying here, that Ososeph, Moses, sent an embassy to the shepherds, the Hyksos Israelites, who had been expelled by Thutmose, well, pretty much the same, during the Great Exodus, to a city called Jerusalem. Yeah, that's exactly where they went to. and he's begging them to unite wholeheartedly with them upon an attack on Egypt, because Akhenaten, Ososeph, want to defend themselves against their father, Amenhotep III, who's down in the south. He's down in Thebes somewhere. It equates with history. It equates with the biblical story as we know it. So the text continues. It says, he offered to conduct them first to their ancestral home in Avaris, to provide their hosts with lavish supplies, to fight on their behalf wherever the need arose. So he's talking to the Hyksos Israelites in Jerusalem here. So I better read that again. Ososeph, Moses, offered to conduct them, the Hyksos Israelites, first to their ancestral home at Avaris. Remember, that's where the Exodus started, in Avaris, Pyramisi, and to provide them with lavish supplies to fight on their behalf whenever the need arose. He's looking for mercenary fighters to help him from the people who are in Jerusalem. Overjoyed at the proposal, all the shepherds, to a number of 200,000 people, eagerly set out, and not long after arrived in Avaris to help Akhenaten and Nefertiti and Ososeph Moses. You see the links here between the Amarna dynasty and the biblical story. I don't know why this is not highlighted more often, because it's fairly obvious it's the same story. You just have to know that there were two exoduses, not one exodus. So the big exodus was back in 1600 BC. Now we're talking about the little exodus, which is in about roughly 1320 BC. When Amenhotep III, Pharaoh of Egypt, learned of their invasion, he was greatly troubled, for he recalled the prediction of Amenephis, or Amenhotep, the son of Papis, the guy with the temple we were talking about. So again, it's saying that the father of Akhenaten is still alive at this time, and he's down in Thebes. So first, Amenhotep III gathered a multitude of Egyptians. Having taken counsel with the leading men, he summoned to his presence the sacred animals, which were held in greatest reverence in the temples, which would have been the Apis bull, no doubt, and gave instructions to each group of priests to conceal the images of the gods as securely as possible. Yeah, again, that accords with both history and the biblical story, because Akhenaten went around the whole of Egypt cutting out all of the images of the gods. That's why they're hiding and concealing the images of the gods. And Abraham and Moses did exactly the same. They were the first of the monotheists, and that's what Abraham was trying to do down in Egypt, was to effectively cut out the images of the gods, because he wanted only one God. Monotheism started with Moses and with Akhenaten. And of course, Moses was the brother of Akhenaten. You can see where it all fits in. And it continues. As for his 5-year-old son, so this is the son of Amenhotep III, called Sethos, also called Ramesses, after his father Ramses, Amenhotep III sent him safely away to his friend. He then crossed the Nile with 300,000 of the bravest warriors of Egypt, and met the enemy of Ososeph. Again, this sort of accords very well with history. So it's actually adding to history, because Sethos is obviously Seti I. Now, we didn't previously know that Sethos was maybe the son of Amenhotep III, called after Ramesses, his grandfather Ramses. The chronology is not entirely certain there, but anyway, Sethos is going to be Seti I, or possibly even Ramesses I. But anyway, they are linking these two families together. The family of Amenhotep III, he's linking with the Ramesside pharaohs and with Seti I. And they are sending an army against Ososeph, who is Moses. Now, again, from the biblical story, you might not know that Moses, the biblical Moses, was the commander of the Egyptian army. We don't get that from the Old Testament. We get that from Josephus Flavius, who has a parallel story about the Exodus. And he says that Moses was the chief army commander of Egypt. And he led a army and a war against the Nubians in the south. And he defeated the Nubians, and he took the Nubian princess or queen as a bride, and she was called Tharbis. So yes, Moses was an army commander. And also in the biblical story, of course, you remember he killed 3,000 bull worshippers on the Exodus. So yeah, here is a battle between these two groups now. We have Akhenaten and Moses. Akhenaten's brother was called Moses. And they're defending themselves against Amenhotep III, who's obviously still alive down in south, who's just sent an army up to Avaris in the Nile Delta. And it goes on, and it says, but instead of joining battle, Pharaoh Amenhotep III decided that he must not fight against the gods. Well, it was always a problem, isn't it? Because you're fighting against your son, for starters, but also you're fighting against the gods, and that was always difficult in ancient times. And so he made a hasty retreat to Memphis, which is down by Giza, sort of thing. There he took charge of the Apis and the other sacred animals, and forthwith he set off for Ethiopia, his whole army and the host of Egyptians. Now you see why Josephus says that Moses took an army down into Nubia, because he's obviously chasing Amenhotep III, Akhenaten's father, down into Nubia. So temporarily, Akhenaten appears to have won this battle. The Ethiopian king in Nubia, they always confuse Ethiopia with Nubia. I think they're probably talking about Nubia here, not necessarily Ethiopia. The Ethiopian king, who in gratitude for a service became his subject, welcomed him, Amenhotep III, and maintained the whole of his army, the whole of his multitude, and assigned them cities and villages sufficient for a period of 13 years banishment from his realm. Not entirely clear what they're actually talking about here. They might be talking about the banishment of Amenhotep III during the era of Amarna, which lasted for about 13 years. So they might be talking about the Amarna dynasty here, that Amenhotep III was chased out of the country when Akhenaten was actually at Amarna, not afterwards when he was in Avaris. These ancient histories do get confused. You have to bear with them sometimes, that some of the details they give are duplicated and confused. Anyway, we shall continue with it. Meanwhile, the Solimites are people from Jerusalem. So these are the ex-Hyksos who had been exiled to Jerusalem and now had come back into Egypt to assist Akhenaten and Moses. They made a descent along with the polluted Egyptians and treated the Egyptians, it says, I'm imagining it's meaning the upper Egyptians down in Thebes, so impiously and savagely that the domination of the shepherds, the Hyksos, seemed like a golden age to those who witnessed the present enormities. So they're saying that the followers and the fighters that Akhenaten had were actually treating them worse than the Hyksos Israelites. Remember, the Hyksos period was 300 years before this, so a long time ago. For they not only set towns and villages on fire, pillaging the temples and mutilating the images of the gods without restraint, but they also made a practice of using the sanctuaries as the temple sanctuaries as kitchens to roast the sacred animals upon, which is pretty much true. This is exactly what Akhenaten did. He went down into Thebes and he cut out all of the images and the names of the gods, exactly as it said here. And no doubt he probably did use the sanctuaries as kitchens to roast the sacred animals upon, which would have been the Apis bull. So again, that accords with history. And then it says, and Ososeph, remember that is Moses, compelled the priests and the prophets to sacrifice and butcher the sacred beasts, afterwards casting the men forth naked. So they're forcing the old priests, the priests of Thebes, to kill the Apis bull and roast it as a punishment, because of course the Apis bull was supposed to be sacred, and now here they're being forced to slaughter an Apis bull and eat it, roast it and eat it. Again, that's probably true. Remember, Moses had the golden calf incident, which is when he killed the 3,000 bull worshippers. It's doing exactly the same. It's destroying the Apis bull. That's exactly what the book of Exodus says. And then finally it says, so we're almost coming to the end here. Manetho says, it is said that the priest who formed their constitution, this is the constitution of the 80,000 lepers and maimed priests, the people of Amarna, the priest who framed their constitution and their laws was a native of Heliopolis called Ososeph, son of Osiris. He worshipped at Heliopolis, but when he joined the people, he changed his name and was called Moses. This is the biblical Moses. So it's saying he changed his name and he was called Moses. That's probably true in a way, because a lot of these people had old names before they became Artanists, and they changed their names to names that honored the Artan. So it's quite possible that someone like Tuthmosis, who was the brother of Akhenaten, was called something like Ososeph before Artanism was designed, and before they went to Amarna to set up their little commune there. He may well have been called Ososeph, and he probably was a priest of Heliopolis. But of course, when they went to Amarna, he became called Tuthmosis, Moses, the biblical Moses, meaning actually that would have changed as well, because Tuthmosis means the son of Thoth, the god of writing and whatever. And he would have changed his name again in Amarna and honored the Artan, of course, the same as Akhenaten and all of the other royalty in Amarna, all honored the Artan in their name. So that is the testimony of Manetho, talking about the Amarna dynasty. And it's quite obvious that the Amarna dynasty is one and the same as the biblical Exodus story. It's the same story. Remember, there were two exoduses. There was the big exodus of the Hyksos, and then the small exodus of Akhenaten and Moses, or Aaron and Moses. And all the biblical story has done is it's pretty much conflated these two Exodus stories and turned them into a single event. But in reality, there was about 300 years between them. But what it's saying is that the biblical Exodus, the end of it, where it's talking about Aaron and Moses, is the story of Akhenaten and Moses. It's the Amarna story. And that's, of course, why the God of the Israelites is called the Ardan. The same as the God of Akhenaten was also called the Ardan. It's the same religion. It's the same monotheism. It's the same story. And I think there we've probably come to the end of that little monologue.
Thanks for watching, everyone, and if you've enjoyed it, please like, share and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. Thank you very much.